The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes across the massive amphitheater. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of each delegation. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the assembly. His scaled hide gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been challenged. "Fellow council members," he began, his words translated instantly into dozens of languages through neural implants. The action taken against the human homeworld was necessary. For too long we have allowed this young species to grow unchecked. Their expansion into 17 star systems in less than 2 centuries is unprecedented. Their military buildup threatens the stability we have maintained for over 3,000 years. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the chamber. The Velthari delegation clicked their mandibles approvingly, while the crystalline Zerion representatives chimed in harmonious tones. The humans, however, remained silent in their small section near the back of the chamber. General Sarah Chen sat motionless, her weathered face betraying nothing of the storm raging within her mind. Beside her, Ambassador Rodriguez gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The other 3 members of the human delegation stared straight ahead, their military discipline evident in their perfect posture despite the circumstances. Zethkar continued his speech, his confidence growing with each word. The surgical strike on Terra was precise. We targeted only military installations and government centers. Civilian casualties were minimal, and the message was clear. Humanity must know its place in the galactic order. "Minimal casualties," Rodriguez whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible even to his fellow humans. 12 million people. General Chen placed a steadying hand on the ambassador's shoulder. Her gray eyes remained fixed on Zethkar as he outlined the terms of humanity's surrender. Complete withdrawal from all colonies beyond their home system, dismantling of their fleet, acceptance of hegemony oversight for all future human activities. The Corvin delegate, a being that resembled a walking tree trunk with too many eyes, rose from his section. "The hegemony speaks wisdom," he said, his voice like creaking wood. "Young species must learn their limitations. The humans have shown dangerous independence." This correction was overdue. More agreements echoed through the chamber. The plasma lords of Arcturus sent waves of superheated gas in patterns that their translators interpreted as enthusiastic support. The insectoid hive queens of the cluster chittered their approval in perfect unison. Throughout it all, the humans remained silent. Zethkar's eyes glowed with satisfaction as he surveyed the chamber. "The human response to our ultimatum is due within 1 standard galactic day. I trust they will see reason and accept these generous terms. After all, what choice do they have? Their fleet consists of barely 300 vessels. Their technology, while impressive for such a young species, cannot compare to the combined might of the Hegemony Alliance." "If I may," interrupted Councillor Thrain of the Peaceful Collective, her melodic voice cutting through the chatter like a silver bell. The ethereal being floated slightly above her designated area, her translucent form shimmering with concern. "Perhaps we should hear from the human delegation before we celebrate this victory. They have been remarkably quiet during these proceedings." All eyes turned to the human section. The chamber fell silent, waiting for their response. Ambassador Rodriguez started to rise, but General Chen's hand pressed him back into his seat. Instead, she stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Honored council members," she began, her voice clear and strong, despite the weight of grief she carried. Every translator in the chamber struggled to convey the cold fury that lay beneath her calm tone. "You speak of surgical strikes and minimal casualties. You speak of teaching us our place and showing us reason." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled aliens. Many of them had never seen a human before today. To them, humans were just another species to be managed, controlled, and kept in line. "You attacked our home," General Chen said simply. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zethkar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Your home, General, is now under our protection. You should be grateful. The alternative would have been much worse. You killed our children," Chen continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You destroyed our schools, our hospitals, our museums. You turned the morning sky over New Geneva into fire and ash. You made widows and orphans of people whose only crime was being born human. The chamber stirred uneasily. Something in the general's tone was beginning to penetrate even the most arrogant delegates. This wasn't the voice of a beaten enemy begging for mercy. This was something else entirely. General Chen, Zethkar said, his voice taking on a warning tone, I suggest you choose your next words carefully. The Council has shown remarkable restraint in dealing with your species. That restraint should not be taken for granted. General Chen nodded slowly as if acknowledging his point. She reached into her uniform jacket and withdrew a small device, placing it on the podium before her. The holographic display showed real-time data streaming from across human space. You want to know our response to your ultimatum? She asked. You want to know if we'll accept your generous terms and bow to your will? The data streams on her display began shifting, showing massive energy signatures appearing at the edges of human territory. Fleet movements on a scale that defied the intelligence reports the Council had received. Here's our response, General Chen said, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of confusion and alarm. You attacked our home. You killed our people. You thought we were just another species to be bullied into submission. The display now showed over 2,000 human vessels moving toward hegemony space, their formations precise and purposeful, ships that officially didn't exist according to every intelligence report the Council possessed. General Chen's voice rose slightly, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. You were wrong. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates realized what they were seeing. The humans hadn't built a fleet of 300 ships. They had built a fleet of thousands, hidden in the dark spaces between stars, waiting for exactly this moment. Zethkar stared at the display in disbelief, his forearms trembling with rage and fear. Impossible, he whispered. Our intelligence networks are flawless. We know everything about human military capabilities. General Chen smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It wasn't a pleasant expression. No, she said quietly. You know what we wanted you to know. The emergency session of the Galactic Council continued through the night cycle, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had been confidence and celebration just hours before, now there was confusion and growing fear. Delegates huddled in small groups, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of worry that filled the great chamber. General Chen remained at the human delegation's position, her holographic display still showing the movement of human fleets across the galaxy. The numbers kept growing as more ships emerged from hidden positions. What had started as 2,000 vessels was now approaching 4,000, and still they came. Zethkar paced back and forth on the main floor, his forearms gesturing wildly as he argued with his military advisors. The confident leader who had addressed the council earlier was gone, replaced by someone struggling to understand how his perfect intelligence network had failed so completely. It's impossible, he kept repeating. We have monitoring stations in every system. Our spy networks cover all major human colonies. There's no way they could have hidden a fleet this size. Admiral Korthak, the hegemony's supreme military commander, studied the data streams with growing alarm. His cybernetic implants processed information at speeds that would overwhelm an organic brain. But even he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. General, he said, turning to address Chen directly, our records show your largest shipyard can produce maybe 50 vessels per year. The mathematics don't work. You've only been a spacefaring species for 3 centuries. Where did these ships come from? General Chen stood and walked to the central floor, her boots clicking on the polished stone. Every eye in the chamber followed her movement. When she reached the middle of the vast space, she turned to address not just Korthak, but the entire assembled council. Admiral, your mathematics are correct, she said. Our largest shipyard can indeed produce 50 ships per year. But you made one critical error in your calculations. She gestured to her display, which now showed a 3-dimensional map of human space. Red dots marked known colonies and installations, while blue dots showed the locations her fleets were emerging from. You assumed we only had one shipyard. The display zoomed in on a region of space that appeared empty on all council charts. Suddenly, massive structures became visible. Shipyards the size of small moons hidden in asteroid fields and dark nebulae. Construction facilities that had been building ships for decades while projecting sensor shadows that made them invisible to outside observation. The hegemony has 47 member species, Chen continued. Each one contributes to your military might. But you think like a confederation. You share resources, divide responsibilities, coordinate efforts across multiple worlds and species. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Humans think differently. When we decided we needed a fleet, we didn't divide the work. We didn't coordinate with other species. We took our entire industrial capacity and focused it on one goal: protecting our people. The display shifted again, showing production timelines that stretched back over a century. While the Council had been monitoring the official human fleet, tracking their modest expansion and technological development, another program had been running in parallel. A program that treated war not as a possibility but as an inevitability. Counselor Thrain of the Peaceful Collective floated closer to Chen, her ethereal form shimmering with distress. "General, surely you see the madness in this approach. You've spent generations preparing for conflict instead of seeking harmony. The resources you've wasted on this secret fleet could have advanced your civilization by centuries." General Chen turned to face the peaceful alien, and for a moment her expression softened slightly. "Counselor, I respect your species' commitment to peace. Your people have never known war, and that's a beautiful thing. But we've studied galactic history. We know what happens to young species that can't defend themselves." The display changed again, showing historical data from the Council's own archives. Species that had been absorbed by the hegemony. Worlds that had been protected until their inhabitants forgot how to be independent. Civilizations that had been reduced to client states, their cultures slowly erased in favor of hegemony efficiency. "We saw the pattern," Chen said. "First comes the offer of protection, then the gradual restrictions on freedom, then the discovery that leaving the protection is no longer possible. We decided that path was not acceptable." Zethkar had stopped pacing and now stood directly in front of Chen, his massive form towering over the human general. Up close, his scaled hide showed the scars of a dozen battles, and his eyes burned with the fury of someone whose authority had never been challenged. "You speak of patterns and history," he growled. "But you ignore the most important pattern of all. Young species that challenge the established order are destroyed. That's not a threat, General. That's a law of nature. The strong survive, the weak serve, and the foolish perish." "You're right," Chen said simply. "The foolish do perish." She touched a control on her display and new data appeared. Fleet compositions, weapon specifications, tactical formations. But these weren't just numbers on a screen. They were the culmination of a century of preparation by a species that had learned from every conflict in recorded history. "We studied your wars, Zethkar. All of them. We analyzed your tactics, your strategies, your technology. We learned how you fight, and more importantly, we learned why you always win." The assembled delegates leaned forward despite their fear. What could this young species possibly teach beings who had been waging war for millennia? "You always win because you fight species that think like you do," Chen explained. "They build fleets to match your fleets. They develop weapons to counter your weapons. They try to outthink you using the same strategic principles you've mastered over thousands of years." She gestured to the display, where human ship designs became visible. They were unlike anything in the Council's databases. Sleeker, more aggressive, built around principles that the older species had dismissed as inefficient or impractical. "We didn't try to build better versions of your ships," Chen said. "We built ships designed to kill your ships specifically. Every armor configuration, every weapon placement, every tactical system was designed with one enemy in mind: you." Admiral Korthak's cybernetic implants whirred as he processed this information. "Even if that's true," he said, "you're still outnumbered. The Hegemony Alliance controls 600,000 vessels across 47 species. Your fleet, however impressively hidden, cannot match those numbers." "You're absolutely right," Chen agreed. "In a fair fight, we would lose." She touched another control and the display showed something that made several delegates gasp in shock. Human ships weren't heading for hegemony military bases or fleet concentrations. They were moving toward civilian targets. Mining operations, trade routes, communication hubs, supply depots. "But this won't be a fair fight," General Chen said quietly. "You taught us that when you attacked our home." The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The hegemony had always won through superior numbers and technology, fighting conventional battles against enemies who played by accepted rules of warfare. But humans had studied those rules and decided they were suggestions, not laws. "You want to know why we built this fleet in secret?" Chen asked, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Because we knew that someday someone would attack our home, and we wanted to be ready to show them what humans do to anyone who hurts our people." The display now showed projected casualty figures and economic damage estimates. The numbers were staggering. If the human fleet followed through on their apparent strategy, they would cripple the hegemony's ability to wage war within months, not years. Zethkar stared at the projections, his confidence crumbling as he realized the scope of what he was facing. "This is madness," he whispered. "You would destroy the stability of the entire galaxy over one military action." General Chen's eyes hardened. "No," she said. "You destroyed the stability when you killed our children. We're just responding appropriately." The first reports reached the Galactic Council chamber 6 hours after General Chen's declaration. What started as scattered communications from the outer edges of hegemony space quickly became a flood of distress signals that painted a picture none of the assembled delegates had expected. Admiral Korthak stood before the main display, his cybernetic implants working frantically to process the incoming data. His organic face had gone pale as he watched red icons disappear across the tactical map. Each icon represented a major infrastructure target that was no longer responding to communications. "The Kepler Mining Consortium is gone," he reported, his voice strained. 17 extraction facilities across 4 star systems. No survivors. The attacks were coordinated to the second. "What about the defense platforms?" Zethkar demanded. "Those facilities were protected by automated defense grids. How did the humans get through?" Korthak manipulated the display, showing the remains of one mining facility, where there had once been a thriving operation extracting rare minerals from an asteroid field. Now there was only debris. But the destruction pattern was unlike anything they had seen before. "They didn't fight the defenses," Korthak said slowly, still trying to understand what he was looking at. "They ignored them completely. The human ships came in from angles the defense platforms weren't designed to cover. They struck the facilities directly and left before the automated systems could even target them." Counselor Yerix of the Eternal Dominion fluttered her crystalline wings in agitation. Her species had designed those defense systems, and they had been considered impregnable for over 1,000 years. "Impossible," she chimed. "The defense matrices cover all approach vectors. There are no blind spots." "There are now," General Chen said from her position near the back of the chamber. She hadn't moved from the human delegation area, but her voice carried clearly across the vast space. "Your defense platforms were designed to stop ships that attack like yours do. Frontal approaches, sustained bombardment, conventional tactical formations." She gestured to her own display, which showed detailed schematics of hegemony defense systems. The information was far more complete than it should have been, revealing decades of intelligence gathering that the Council had never suspected. "We studied your defenses for 70 years, Chen continued. "We identified weaknesses you didn't even know existed, gaps in coverage that occur during platform rotation cycles, blind spots created when multiple platforms try to target the same vessel, timing delays in the automated response systems." The display showed human attack runs in slow motion, ships moving in patterns that seemed random, but were actually precisely calculated to exploit every flaw in the defensive networks. They struck like surgical instruments, destroying their targets with minimal energy expenditure and maximum efficiency. "But more reports are coming in," Admiral Korthak said, pulling up new data. "The Arcturus trade route has been completely severed. 43 cargo vessels destroyed in coordinated attacks along a route that spans 12 light years. How did they know exactly where to find our ships?" General Chen smiled grimly. "Admiral, your species has been using the same trade routes for over 2,000 years. They're listed in every navigation database in the galaxy. Did you really think we couldn't figure out where your ships would be?" The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. The hegemony had grown comfortable in their dominance, following patterns that had worked for millennia. But humans had studied those patterns and turned them into vulnerabilities. "The communications hub at Zerion Prime is under attack," reported Counselor Zeph of the Quantum Collective, his energy form fluctuating with stress. "The facility is responsible for coordinating fleet movements across 17 sectors. If it falls, your fleet coordination will be disrupted for months," Chen finished. "Yes, we know. That's why we targeted it." More reports flooded in. The hegemony's massive war machine was designed around centralized command and control, with key facilities managing vast regions of space. It was efficient and had worked perfectly against every enemy they had ever faced. But it also created single points of failure that humans had identified and were now systematically destroying. Zethkar turned to face the human delegation, his 4 arms trembling with rage. "This is not warfare," he snarled. "This is terrorism. You're attacking civilian targets, disrupting commerce, destroying infrastructure that took centuries to build." "We're fighting a war," General Chen replied calmly. "The same war you started when you attacked our homeworld. The only difference is that we understand what war actually means." She stood and walked to the central floor again, her movements deliberate and controlled. Around her, delegates from dozens of species watched in fascination and growing fear. "For 3,000 years, the hegemony has fought wars against species that accepted your rules of engagement," she said. "Fleet versus fleet, military target versus military target. Winner takes all. It's a very civilized way to fight." The display behind her changed to show historical battles from hegemony conflicts. Massive fleets facing each other in open space, trading volleys until one side was defeated. It was warfare on a grand scale, but it followed accepted conventions that limited the scope of destruction. "But you made a mistake when you attacked Earth," Chen continued. "You assumed we would follow those same rules. You thought we would challenge your fleets directly, meet your ships in open battle, and accept defeat when we were outgunned." New images appeared on the display. Human ships weren't engaging hegemony fleets at all. They were avoiding them completely, striking at the infrastructure that supported those fleets while leaving the warships themselves untouched and increasingly irrelevant. "We learned something from studying your history," Chen said. "Wars aren't won by destroying enemy fleets. They're won by destroying the enemy's ability to maintain those fleets. Their shipyards, their supply lines, their command and control systems, their economic base." Admiral Korthak stared at the tactical display in growing horror as he realized the scope of what was happening. "You're not trying to defeat our military forces," he said slowly. "You're trying to collapse our entire civilization." "No," Chen corrected. "We're trying to win a war. Your civilization will survive, but it will be different afterward. Less aggressive, less confident about attacking worlds full of children." The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates realized the implications. The Velthari clicked their mandibles in outrage while the plasma lords sent waves of superheated gas in patterns that clearly expressed their fury. The crystalline Xerian representatives chimed in discordant harmonies that hurt to hear. But underneath the anger, there was something else. Fear. For the first time in millennia, the established powers of the galaxy were facing an enemy that didn't play by their rules, an enemy that had studied their weaknesses and was exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. "Incoming priority transmission from the Hegemony Home Fleet," announced the Chamber's communication system. Admiral Korthak activated the connection, and the image of Fleet Commander Voss appeared in holographic display. Voss was a veteran of 100 battles, his scarred hide and cybernetic replacements testament to his experience. But now his eyes held something that hadn't been there in over a century: uncertainty. "Admiral," he reported, "the human fleet has refused all attempts at engagement. Our forces at Rigel Station moved to intercept them, but they withdrew before we could bring them to battle. Instead, they hit the fuel depot at Proxima 7 while our ships were out of position." "Casualties?" Korthak asked. "None to our fleet," Voss replied. "But without the fuel depot, the third battle group is stranded. They have enough power to reach the nearest supply point, but not enough to engage in combat operations." General Chen nodded approvingly. "Classic human strategy, Commander. Why fight your ships when we can simply remove their ability to fight?" The communication ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Slowly, the delegates began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A young species that had not only survived an attack by the hegemony, but was now systematically dismantling their enemy's ability to wage war. "How long?" Zethkar asked quietly. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day we made first contact with your species," Chen replied. "We knew this moment would come eventually. You're predators and we were obviously prey, so we spent 200 years learning how to stop being prey and start being something else entirely." She touched a control on her display, showing the current positions of human fleets across the galaxy. They were everywhere, striking at targets the hegemony had never thought to defend, using tactics that turned the aliens' own size and complexity against them. "What are we then?" asked Counselor Thrain, her peaceful nature struggling to comprehend what she was witnessing. General Chen looked directly at her, and for just a moment, the mask of military discipline slipped to reveal the grief and rage underneath. "We're parents," she said simply. "And you hurt our children." 3 days had passed since the human offensive began, and the Galactic Council chamber had become a fortress of desperate activity. Emergency sessions ran around the clock as reports continued to flood in from across hegemony space. What had started as shock and outrage was rapidly transforming into something the galactic powers hadn't experienced in centuries. Genuine fear. Ambassador Rodriguez stood beside General Chen as they watched the latest intelligence briefings. The human delegation had grown from 5 to over 50 as military advisors. Intelligence officers and diplomatic specialists arrived through emergency transport. But Chen remained the focal point, the calm center around which all human activity revolved. The Andromeda sector command structure has completely collapsed, Admiral Korthak reported to the assembled council. His cybernetic implants sparked occasionally now, overwhelmed by the constant stream of crisis data they were processing. 17 command posts destroyed in coordinated strikes. Regional fleet commanders are operating independently without central coordination. Zethkar paced behind the podium, his forearms moving in agitated gestures. The confident leader who had celebrated humanity's humbling just days ago now looked like a predator, suddenly finding himself surrounded by an enemy he didn't understand. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. "In direct combat?" 7, Korthak replied. "But without fuel, spare parts, ammunition, and coordination, over 400 vessels are effectively out of action. The humans aren't destroying our fleet. They're making it irrelevant." The tactical display showed the current state of hegemony forces. Massive battle groups sat motionless in space, their weapons intact but their ability to project power completely neutralized. It was like watching a giant slowly realize it was bleeding to death from 1,000 small cuts. "This is impossible," Counselor Irix chimed, her crystalline form vibrating with distress. "Our intelligence networks should have detected such extensive preparations. How did an entire species coordinate a deception of this magnitude for 2 centuries? General Chen stepped forward, her boots clicking on the stone floor as she approached the central area. Around her, delegates from 47 species watched with a mixture of fascination and terror as she began to speak. "Counselor, you're thinking like a federation," Chen said. "Your species cooperate because you have to. Different worlds, different needs, different priorities. Coordination requires compromise, and compromise creates inefficiency." She gestured to the human delegation, which had arranged itself in perfect formation without any apparent orders or discussion. "Humans don't compromise on survival. When we decided our species needed to survive what we knew was coming, every human world, every human colony, every human ship contributed to that goal." "Impossible," scoffed Delegate Vorth of the Hive Queens. His insectoid form clicked and chittered as he spoke. "No species achieves such perfect coordination without a central control mechanism. Our hive mind allows for instant communication and perfect obedience. Your species is individualistic, chaotic. You should be incapable of such unified action." Chen smiled, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably at the expression. There was something predatory in it that reminded them uncomfortably of their own species' ancient fears. "You're right that we're individualistic," she agreed. "Every human thinks for themselves, makes their own decisions, follows their own path. But there's one thing every human agrees on completely, without exception or compromise." The chamber fell silent, waiting for her explanation. "No one hurts our children," Chen said simply. "That's not a law or a military doctrine or a political principle. That's what we are. Attack a human family and you get one angry human. Attack a human community and you get an angry community. Attack the human species and you get every human who ever lived working together to end you." The display behind her changed to show communication intercepts from across human space. Millions of conversations, each one different but all carrying the same underlying message. Construction workers volunteering for 18-hour shifts to build more ships. Farmers redirecting entire harvests to feed military crews. Children too young to work finding ways to contribute to the war effort. "This is your fundamental error," Chen continued. "You thought we were like you. A species that needs to be managed, controlled, guided by superior wisdom. You saw our small official fleet and our scattered colonies and thought we were weak. New images appeared, showing the true scope of human industrial capacity. Every asteroid mining operation had secret production lines. Every agricultural world had hidden shipyards. Every research station had been developing weapons and defensive systems. The humans had turned their entire civilization into a war machine while maintaining the facade of peaceful expansion. But we learned from studying your history, Chen said. We learned what happens to species that trust in the wisdom and protection of more powerful neighbors. We decided that path led to extinction, and we chose a different direction. Admiral Korthak stared at the displays, his military mind struggling to process the implications. The resource allocation alone should have been impossible to hide, he muttered. Our economic intelligence tracked human industrial output for decades. There should have been clear signs of military production. There were, Chen confirmed. But you saw what you expected to see. Mining equipment that could easily be converted to ship construction, agricultural tractors that shared components with military vehicles, research facilities that developed civilian technology with obvious military applications. The truth was sinking in for the assembled delegates. The humans hadn't hidden their preparations so much as camouflaged them as normal civilian development. Every shovel that could be turned into a weapon, every tractor that could become a tank, every transport ship that could carry troops instead of cargo. The Centauri Shipping Consortium reports complete loss of their trade fleet, announced a new voice from the Chamber's communication system. 47 vessels destroyed while en route to various destinations. The attacks were perfectly timed to maximize disruption of scheduled deliveries. Zethkar turned to stare at Chen with growing desperation in his eyes. You're destroying the economic foundation of galactic civilization, he said. Trade routes that have existed for millennia. Supply chains that support billions of beings across dozens of species. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Yes, Chen replied without hesitation. We're teaching you that there are consequences for attacking humanity. Every ship you destroy, every life you take, every world you threaten will cost you more than you can imagine. The display shifted again, showing economic projections that made several delegates gasp in horror. The systematic destruction of hegemony infrastructure wasn't just a military campaign. It was an economic war that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. You're talking about causing a galactic recession that could last for decades, Counselor Thrain said, her ethereal form flickering with distress. Billions of innocent beings will suffer for the actions of their governments. 12 million humans suffered for the actions of our government 3 days ago. Chen replied, her voice cold as space itself. I noticed none of you seemed concerned about innocent suffering then. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates realized the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't a traditional war that would end with negotiated peace terms and acceptable losses. The humans were rewriting the rules of galactic conflict, and they were prepared to burn down the existing order to make their point. Incoming priority alert, the communication system announced. Emergency session of the Hegemony High Command is requesting immediate council intervention. Fleet Admiral Zerth reports that human forces have begun targeting Hegemony core worlds. A collective gasp rose from the assembled delegates. Core worlds were considered untouchable in galactic warfare. They contained billions of civilians, cultural treasures that represented millennia of development, and industrial facilities that supported entire sectors of space. Surely you won't target civilian populations? Delegate Vorth clicked nervously. That would violate every convention of civilized warfare. General Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made several delegates step back involuntarily. Did you ask that question when your fleets targeted Earth? Did anyone in this chamber stand up to defend the conventions of civilized warfare when human children were being killed? The silence that followed was deafening. Every delegate in the chamber knew the answer. They had supported the attack on Earth, celebrated humanity's humbling, and looked forward to incorporating human resources into their own empires. You started this war with an attack on our homeworld, Chen continued. You set the rules of engagement when you decided civilian casualties were acceptable. Now you're concerned about conventions and innocent populations? She touched a control on her display and new data appeared. Human fleets were indeed moving toward hegemony core worlds, but their targets weren't population centers. They were the massive industrial complexes, spaceports, and communication networks that kept those worlds functioning. We won't target your civilians, Chen said, and several delegates sighed with ER. The fifth day of the human offensive marked a turning point that none of the galactic powers could have anticipated. The hegemony's carefully maintained facade of invincibility was crumbling as reports of system-wide failures cascaded through their command structure. In the council chambers, emergency sessions had become permanent, with delegates struggling to comprehend the speed and scope of civilization's unraveling. Fleet Admiral Zerth appeared via holographic projection, his usually pristine uniform torn and stained with the evidence of his desperate attempts to maintain some semblance of command. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed damage from what appeared to be multiple system failures rather than enemy fire. "The humans have achieved something unprecedented," he reported to the assembled council, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "They've managed to wage war against our entire infrastructure simultaneously. Our fleets can't protect everything because there's no central target to defend against." Admiral Korthak leaned forward, his cybernetic implants struggling to process the tactical nightmare his species was facing. "Report on fleet readiness," he commanded. 70% of our combat vessels are operational," Zerth replied, "but less than 20% are combat effective. We lack fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and reliable communication with command structures. The humans aren't fighting our ships. They're making our ships irrelevant." General Chen watched these exchanges with the detached interest of a scientist observing a successful experiment. Her human delegation had grown again, now including specialists in infrastructure warfare, economic disruption, and post-conflict reconstruction. They weren't just winning a war. They were preparing to reshape the galaxy that would emerge from it. "The Rigel industrial complex has gone dark," reported Councillor Zeph, his energy form fluctuating with stress patterns that his species hadn't displayed in living memory. 3 billion beings depend on that facility for basic necessities. Without it, entire sectors will face humanitarian crisis within weeks. "Then perhaps," General Chen said quietly, "the hegemony should consider surrendering before that happens." The word surrender hung in the chamber's air like a poison gas. For 3,000 years the hegemony had been the power that others surrendered to. The concept of their defeat was so foreign that several delegates seemed unable to process it. Zethkar turned on Chen with fury that bordered on madness. "Surrender?" he snarled. "We command 47 species across 600 star systems. Our fleets number in the hundreds of thousands. Our industrial capacity dwarfs yours by orders of magnitude. You speak of surrender?" "I speak of mathematics," Chen replied calmly. She gestured to her display, which showed the current state of hegemony logistics. "Your fleets are impressive, but they're also completely dependent on the infrastructure we're systematically destroying. Your industrial capacity is vast, but it's centralized in facilities we're making inoperative. Your 600 star systems are connected by communication and transport networks we're severing one by one." The display shifted to show projections of hegemony capability over time. The curve was steep and unforgiving, showing a collapse that would accelerate as damaged systems failed to maintain each other. "In 2 weeks, your mighty fleets will be collections of metal floating in space," Chen continued. "In a month, your core worlds will be isolated from each other and struggling to maintain basic civilization. In 3 months, the hegemony as a political entity will cease to exist." "Impossible," Delegate Vorth clicked desperately. "The Hive Queens have maintained perfect order for 5,000 years. Our systems are designed to be self-sustaining." "Your systems are designed to be efficient," Chen corrected. "Efficiency requires specialization, and specialization creates dependencies. You've built a civilization that works perfectly as long as nothing goes wrong. But when something does go wrong, the cascade failures are catastrophic." New reports were coming in faster than the delegates could process them. The Kepler Mining Consortium had declared bankruptcy after losing their entire extraction fleet. The Arcturus Trade Authority was suspending all operations due to the complete loss of their route security. The Centauri Banking Consortium was freezing assets across 17 systems as their communication networks failed. "The humans are fighting a different kind of war," observed Councillor Thrain, her peaceful nature struggling to find patterns in the chaos. "They're not trying to conquer territory or destroy enemy forces. They're trying to make the hegemony collapse under its own weight." "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "We studied your civilization for 2 centuries, and we learned something important. Large complex systems are inherently fragile. They depend on millions of small components working perfectly together. Remove enough of those components, and the entire system fails." She touched a control, and the display showed a 3-dimensional model of hegemony civilization. Supply chains, communication networks, transportation routes, and industrial dependencies formed a complex web that connected every world and every species. "This web looks strong," Chen said, "but it's actually incredibly fragile. Each connection depends on dozens of others. Break enough connections and entire sections of the web collapse. We didn't need to destroy your fleets. We just needed to break your web. Admiral Korthak stared at the model, his military mind finally grasping the scope of what the humans had accomplished. You've been mapping our dependencies for 200 years, he said slowly. Every trade route, every supply chain, every critical facility. You know our civilization better than we do. We know your weaknesses better than you do, Chen agreed, because you've never had to think about them. You've been the dominant power for so long that you forgot how fragile dominance really is. Incoming emergency transmission from the Hegemony Council of Worlds, announced the Chamber's communication system. The transmission was audio only, and the voice that emerged was strained with panic. This is Prime Minister Velkoth of the Inner Council. The situation has become untenable. 7 core worlds have lost primary power generation. 14 industrial centers are operating at less than 10% capacity. Food distribution to over 30 billion beings has been disrupted. We are facing complete societal collapse. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony wasn't just losing a war. It was watching its entire civilization unravel in real time. What are your terms? Velkoth asked, the words clearly painful for him to speak. General Chen stood and walked to the center of the chamber. Every delegate watched her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Here was a representative of the species they had dismissed as young and weak, now holding the power to determine the fate of galactic civilization. Our terms are simple, she said. Complete withdrawal of all hegemony forces from human space. Recognition of human sovereignty over all territory currently under our control. Reparations for the damage inflicted on Earth and the lives lost in your unprovoked attack. That's all? Zethkar asked, suspicion clear in his voice. You have us at your mercy. You could demand anything. Why limit yourselves to such modest terms? Chen turned to face him, and for the first time since the crisis began, her expression softened slightly. Because we're not you, she said simply. We didn't start this war to conquer the galaxy. We started it to protect our people and ensure this never happens again. The display behind her showed the current positions of human fleets. They were holding their positions, no longer advancing toward hegemony core worlds. The systematic destruction had stopped, waiting for a response to their terms. However, Chen continued, her voice hardening again, these terms have an expiration date. For every hour that passes without acceptance, the terms will become more severe. We're prepared to continue this war until the hegemony is nothing more than a historical curiosity. But we'd prefer to stop while your civilization is still salvageable. Prime Minister Velkoth's voice returned through the communication system, weaker now and filled with defeat. How do we know you'll honor these terms? How do we know you won't use your victory to become the new dominant power? Because, General Chen said, we never wanted to be a dominant power. We just wanted to be left alone to raise our children in peace. You made that impossible, so we had to teach you why that was a mistake. The chamber began to stir as delegates realized the war was approaching its end. But the implications of human victory were staggering. The balance of power that had existed for millennia was permanently shattered. The hegemony would survive, but as a shadow of its former self. The Council will need time to consider these terms, Zethkar said, grasping for any delay that might give his people time to recover. You have 6 hours, Chen replied. After that, we resume operations and the terms become less generous. We've demonstrated that we can destroy your civilization whenever we choose. Don't make us prove that we can do it permanently. Fleet Admiral Zerth's image flickered as his communication system struggled with power fluctuations. General, he said, assuming we accept these terms, how do we know this won't happen again? How do we know humanity won't decide to expand its territory or influence? General Chen looked directly at the holographic image, and when she spoke her word. The acceptance came with 4 hours and 37 minutes remaining on General Chen's ultimatum. Prime Minister Velkoth's voice carried across the council chambers with the weight of a civilization's surrender. Each word carefully measured to convey dignity in defeat. The Hegemony Council of Worlds formally accepts the terms presented by the human delegation, he announced. All military forces will withdraw from human space immediately. We recognize human sovereignty over all territory currently under their control. Reparations will be negotiated in good faith to address the damages inflicted upon Earth. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in 3,000 years, the hegemony had capitulated to another power. But more than that, they had been forced to surrender by a species they had dismissed as insignificant just 1 week earlier. General Chen stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by delegates who now looked at her with a mixture of fear, respect, and confusion. The human military uniforms, once seen as quaint symbols of a primitive species, now represented the most effective fighting force the galaxy had ever witnessed. The human fleets will cease offensive operations immediately, Chen announced. However, we will maintain our current positions until the withdrawal of all hegemony forces from human space is verified. We will also continue to monitor compliance with the agreed terms. Zethkar approached the human delegation, his forearms held in a posture that his species used to acknowledge superior strength. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Many had never seen a hegemony leader show deference to anyone. "General," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I must ask about the future relationship between our peoples. The hegemony has been the stabilizing force in this galaxy for millennia. If we withdraw from our role as peacekeepers, what will fill that vacuum?" Chen studied him for a moment before responding. "That's not our problem," she said simply. "We never asked to be peacekeepers or galactic police. We just wanted to be left alone. If the rest of you can't figure out how to coexist without a dominant power forcing order on everyone, that's something you'll need to work out among yourselves." The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The humans weren't interested in replacing the hegemony as the galaxy's rulers. They were simply removing the current rulers and walking away, leaving everyone else to deal with the consequences. Counselor Thrain floated closer to the human delegation, her ethereal form shimmering with concern. "General, surely you understand that sudden power vacuums lead to chaos. Without some form of central authority, we could see widespread conflict as different species attempt to claim former hegemony territory. Then I suggest you start working together to prevent that," Chen replied. "Form alliances, negotiate treaties, establish trade agreements. Do whatever it takes to maintain peace. But don't expect humanity to do it for you." "But you have the power now," insisted Delegate Vorth, his insectoid form clicking nervously. "Your fleet capabilities, your strategic thinking, your coordination. You could bring order to the galaxy more effectively than the hegemony ever did." General Chen's expression hardened. "Delegate Vorth, did you miss the part where we just spent a week systematically dismantling a galactic empire because they attacked our home? Do you really think we want the responsibility of managing 47 different species with 47 different agendas?" She gestured to the tactical displays that still showed the positions of human fleets across the galaxy. "We built this military capability for one purpose: to protect human space from anyone who might threaten it. Now that purpose has been served and we're going home." Admiral Korthak, his cybernetic implants finally stabilizing as the crisis data flow decreased, looked up from his tactical analyses. "General, our intelligence estimates suggest that your fleet could control the entire galaxy within 6 months if you chose to do so. That level of power, it must be tempting." "Admiral," Chen said, turning to face him directly, "power is only tempting to people who want to control others. Humans want to control our own destiny, not anyone else's. The idea of being responsible for the lives and choices of trillions of non-human beings isn't tempting, it's terrifying." The concept seemed to be genuinely difficult for many delegates to understand. For species that had spent millennia either ruling others or being ruled by others, the idea of possessing ultimate power and choosing not to use it was almost incomprehensible. "What happens to the smaller species?" asked Counselor Erix, her crystalline form resonating with worry. "Without hegemony protection, many worlds that lack significant military capabilities will be vulnerable to conquest by their more powerful neighbors." Chen considered this for a moment, and her expression softened slightly. "That's a valid concern," she acknowledged. "And while we won't serve as galactic police, we're not completely indifferent to the fate of peaceful species." She touched a control on her display, and new information appeared: communication channels, emergency protocols, and response procedures that the human military had developed during their war planning. Any species that finds itself under attack by a more powerful neighbor can request human assistance, Chen announced. "We won't intervene in every conflict, but we will respond to unprovoked aggression against peaceful populations. Think of it as an insurance policy against bullies." The delegates stirred with interest. This wasn't the complete abandonment they had feared, but it wasn't the imperial control they were accustomed to either. It was something entirely new, a species with the power to rule, choosing instead to serve as a deterrent against the worst excesses of others. What are the conditions for such assistance? Sethkar asked, clearly trying to understand the parameters of this new galactic reality. Simple, Chen replied. The species requesting help must have been attacked without provocation. They must have attempted diplomatic solutions first, and they must not pose a threat to human interests. We're not going to help aggressive species expand their territory, but we will protect genuinely peaceful peoples from conquest. Incoming transmission from the human homeworld, announced the chamber's communication system. The voice that emerged was older, more weathered than Chen's, but it carried the same underlying strength. This is Admiral Harrison, speaking for Earth Command. General Chen, you and your teams have performed magnificently. The attack on our homeworld has been avenged, and our species' right to exist has been secured. Begin the withdrawal to human space. It's time to come home. General Chen straightened to attention, her military bearing evident even after days of intense negotiations and crisis management. Understood, Admiral. Human fleets are beginning withdrawal operations now. The tactical displays updated in real time, showing the massive human fleets that had paralyzed half the galaxy, beginning their journey back to human space. It was a sight that would be remembered for centuries, the most powerful military force in galactic history voluntarily retreating to allow others to determine their own fate. General, Counselor Thrain called out as Chen prepared to leave the podium. I must ask one final question. Why choose this path when you could have anything you wanted? Chen paused at the edge of the central area and turned back to address the assembled delegates one last time. Because we remember what it felt like to be weak. We remember what it was like to look up at the stars and wonder if someone out there might decide we didn't deserve to exist. We built this fleet and developed these capabilities so that no human child would ever have to feel that way again. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. But we also remember what it felt like to be free. To make our own choices, pursue our own dreams, build our own civilization according to our own values. We're not going to take that away from others just because we have the power to do so. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications of her words. Here was a species that had achieved ultimate power and was choosing to use it only for protection, not conquest. However, Chen added, her tone becoming cold again, remember this moment. Remember what happened when someone decided to attack our home. Remember how quickly your mighty empire crumbled when faced with humans who were truly angry. She let her gaze sweep across every delegate in the chamber. We're going home now, she said. But we're not forgetting. Every human world will remember this week. Every human fleet will train for the possibility of facing threats like this again. Every human child will grow up knowing that our species earned its right to exist through strength, not permission. General Chen turned and walked toward the exit, her delegation falling into formation behind her. At the chamber's entrance, she paused and looked back one final time. The next time someone thinks about attacking human space, she said, they should remember how this ended, because next time we won't offer surrender terms. The echo of her footsteps faded as the human delegation left the chamber. Behind them, 47 species sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the new reality they found themselves in. The age of hegemony dominance was over. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy would spend the next 1,000 years learning what it meant to be free, under the watchful eyes of a species that had proven they would. 5 years had passed since the hegemony's surrender, and the galaxy had settled into what historians were already calling the Long Peace. The great chamber of the Galactic Council looked much the same as it had during those desperate days of war, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Where once there had been the arrogance of unchallenged power, now there was the careful cooperation of equals. General Chen, now bearing the title of Human Ambassador to the Galactic Council, sat in the human delegation area. Her hair had more gray in it, and the lines around her eyes spoke of the weight of responsibility she had carried for half a decade. But her bearing remained as strong as ever, and her presence still commanded respect from every delegate in the chamber. The current speaker was Counselor Thrain, her ethereal form shimmering with contentment as she delivered the annual peace report. For the 5th consecutive year, no species has launched an unprovoked attack against another member of the galactic community. Trade disputes have been resolved through negotiation rather than force. Border conflicts have been settled through arbitration rather than warfare. Murmurs of satisfaction rippled through the assembled delegates. The transition from hegemony rule to the current system of cooperative governance hadn't been easy, but it had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. The economic recovery from the hegemony war continues to exceed projections, Thrain continued. With the removal of centralized control and the establishment of free trade agreements, prosperity has increased across all member species. The redistribution of former hegemony military resources to civilian infrastructure projects has created opportunities that were unimaginable under the old system. Ambassador Rodriguez, now serving as Earth's primary diplomatic representative, leaned toward Chen. "Hard to believe it's only been 5 years," he whispered. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." Chen nodded, her attention focused on the data being presented. The transformation of galactic civilization had been remarkable. Without a dominant military power enforcing rigid order, the various species had been forced to develop genuine diplomatic skills. Trade had flourished, cultural exchange had accelerated, and technological advancement had reached levels that the controlled hegemony system had never achieved. However, Thrain continued, her tone becoming more serious, we must acknowledge that this peace has been maintained through the knowledge that unprovoked aggression will face swift response from human protection forces. 3 incidents in the past year have demonstrated the effectiveness of this deterrent. The chamber's display showed recent examples of human intervention. The Cathera expansion attempt against the peaceful gentlefolk of Proxima had been stopped with a single human destroyer appearing in their system. The Mordak raiders' attack on civilian shipping lanes had ended when human patrol ships arrived and offered the raiders a choice between surrender and destruction. The attempted coup on Vega Prime by the local military had collapsed when human forces simply appeared in orbit and asked if the legitimate government required assistance. In each case, the mere presence of human forces had been sufficient to end the conflict. No shots had been fired, no lives had been lost, and the aggressors had quickly reconsidered their actions. The human protection doctrine has evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, observed the new Kau, representative from the former hegemony worlds. The position was now held by a rotation of species, rather than being dominated by a single power structure. They respond to aggression with overwhelming force, but they also withdraw immediately once the threat is neutralized. They take no territory, demand no tribute, and impose no governance on the rescued populations. Former Admiral Korthak, now serving as a military advisor to the Council, stood to address the Assembly. His cybernetic implants had been updated with peaceful purpose modifications, and his bearing showed the dignity of someone who had learned from defeat. The human military doctrine remains as effective as it was during the war, he reported. Our analysis suggests their fleet capabilities have actually increased over the past 5 years. New ship designs, improved weaponry, and enhanced coordination protocols mean that humanity is now more capable of projecting power than they were when they defeated the hegemony. The implications weren't lost on anyone in the chamber. Humanity had become even stronger since their victory, but they continued to use that strength only for protection rather than conquest. "What about human expansion?" asked Delegate Vorth, his insectoid form having adapted well to the new diplomatic environment. Their population continues to grow, and they're establishing new colonies throughout their region of space. Should we be concerned about territorial conflicts? Ambassador Chen rose to address the question, her movement drawing the attention of every delegate in the chamber. Even 5 years later, her presence commanded immediate silence and respect. "Human expansion continues according to our long-term colonization plans," she reported. "We're establishing settlements in previously uninhabited systems and developing resources that don't conflict with existing territorial claims. Our growth is internal rather than external." She gestured to displays showing human space, which had indeed expanded significantly, but only into regions that no other species had claimed or wanted. "We've also established the Human Colonial Charter," Chen continued, "which requires all new settlements to maintain the same defensive capabilities that protected Earth during the war. Every human world is prepared to defend itself and contribute to the protection of human space." The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just maintaining their current military strength. They were multiplying it with every new world they settled. The most significant development, Chen added, is the completion of the memorial project on Earth. The displays showed images from Earth's surface. Where the destroyed cities had once been, magnificent memorials now stood. Not monuments to victory or conquest, but remembrances of the 12 million civilians who had died in the hegemony's attack. The memorial walls contained the name of every victim, and the surrounding gardens provided spaces for reflection and mourning. Every human child visits these memorials as part of their education, Chen explained. They learn about the cost of being unprepared, the value of strength, and the responsibility that comes with power. They understand that our military capabilities exist not for conquest, but to ensure that no human ever experiences what happened on that day. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. Each new generation of humans would grow up with a visceral understanding of why their species maintained such overwhelming military power and why they used it only for protection. There's something else, Chen continued, her voice taking on a tone of quiet satisfaction. The memorial project included establishing the Institute for Galactic Peace Studies. We've been analyzing the patterns of conflict throughout galactic history, and we're ready to share our findings. New data appeared on the displays showing centuries of war, conquest, and subjugation that had characterized galactic politics before the human intervention. The patterns were clear and depressing. Stronger species dominated weaker ones. Empires rose and fell through military conquest, and peace existed only as brief interludes between conflicts. We've identified the fundamental problem with previous approaches to galactic peace, Chen said. Every dominant power in history has eventually used their strength to impose their will on others. This creates resentment, resistance, and inevitable conflict when that power weakens. The displays shifted to show the current galactic situation. Voluntary cooperation, mutual defense agreements, and economic interdependence had created a stability that military domination had never achieved. The key insight is that true peace requires the strongest power to voluntarily limit itself, Chen explained. Not through weakness, but through choice. When the most powerful force in the galaxy chooses protection over conquest, it creates space for everyone else to prosper. Former Prime Minister Velkoth, now serving as a diplomatic advisor rather than a ruler, stood to address Chen directly. Ambassador, this system depends entirely on human restraint. What happens if future generations of humans decide they want to rule rather than protect? Chen smiled, and this time the expression was warm rather than predatory. Minister, that's why we built the memorials. Every human who sees those names, who visits those gardens, who learns about the cost of that day, understands something fundamental about our species. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. We didn't build the strongest fleet in galactic history because we wanted to conquer worlds, she said. We built it because someone attacked our children and we wanted to make sure that never happened again. As long as humans remember that day, as long as we honor those we lost, we'll continue to use our strength only for protection. The displays showed current human fleet positions throughout the galaxy, patrol routes that intersected with potential conflict zones, rapid response forces positioned to defend peaceful species, and monitoring stations that watched for signs of brewing aggression. But, Chen added, her tone becoming cold as space itself, any species that thinks human restraint means human weakness should remain